Hey guys, and those who are here for the Forever Winter, hey Scavs, saw that a new Q&A came out for the Forever Winter, and I thought it'd be interesting to cover. COVID is getting a bit better. My cough has begun to disappear, which is fantastic. And besides that, we'll be getting straight into talking about a lot of these questions that the Q&A posed to the community. I actually posed a question in this Q&A that was also answered, something that I would like to talk about as well further in. But besides that, let's get straight into it. So the first question here talks about endgame. And endgame for extraction shooters is generally, I'd say, deeply important to the long-term stability and kind of health of an extraction shooter game. It's why Tarkov has wipes generally, because people's content needs to be taken away from them in order for them to be motivated to go and reach for more content, or perhaps to even give value to content that might not be aimed at the late or end game. And how they're doing this for the Forever Winter seems to be a no wipe sort of situation, but your progress can be wiped if you don't take a good enough care of your character hub. And we'll get to a lot of that later on. But it looks like the main progression for the game at the moment is both characters, loot, and the upkeep of the innards, which is the player hub. Secondly, the co-op party size will be 4, which is fine. That's pretty average 4 players for a video game, especially in a co-op game like this. That being said, though, I've seen in quite a bit of their released media and some of the beta videos that have been released during the closed beta period that you can get like hirelings and people who can follow you around and will fight for you. So that makes me think, even though the max party size is 4 players, you might be able to substitute that with AI companions that you've recruited via the innards, such as other scavs that are willing to fight for you, or maybe even something along the lines of an exo-suited soldier that maybe you rescued, like in the Exo life cycle trailer. How that ends up playing out in the long run, I don't know, but it seems, again, very interesting. The cows. We are concerned. The floating cows in the balloons has been nothing if not a striking aesthetic design choice. It makes you ask a lot of questions about something that you probably won't ever have a lot of answers to. That being said, I would like to see some associated quests for these cows at some point. It would add, I think, some interesting levity and horror to a game that aesthetic already matches. So we'll see. Should be interesting. The that guy argument on number 4 here is an interesting distinction, I think, from players. I think a lot of Forever Winter community members don't exactly understand the direction I think these devs are trying to take the game. It's not so much about your equipment than it is about the composition of your group or yourself. You can have huge guns. I don't think they're going to try to stop players from doing that. In some of the released media, there are anti-tank guns you can have. There are heavy machine guns. One of the characters has like a two-handed, I think, MG34 like conversion for like the time period, which is really interesting. Got like a bayonet on it. They're not trying to stop you from having these cool and like really powerful things, but instead they're implementing systems that will counter what you're trying to do, which I think is a much more interesting and intuitive way to design a game. You bring a big machine gun, or all your friends bring big machine guns. Guess what? The Euruskins that are on the field that you're passing see 4 scavs with big machine guns and no longer trust you to be that close and open fire on you. Let's say you return fire, guess what? They're calling it now bigger enemies than you would have had to previously face if you had something like smaller arms. So we'll see how that kind of drives into the gameplay loop as a whole. Hopefully it's as invasive and obvious as they're making it seem, because that just sounds cool. I think without that, the game begins to lose its identity, and having the kind of stumbling through an active battlefield feel is key to this game's identity. So they begin to talk about gated player progression and whatnot, about having gear and new types of items and acquisition of heavy items and whatnot. And again, a lot of these systems and a lot of the ways to acquire these items sits within interacting with the game's mechanics as a whole. It's not that you're going to be gated from having certain things, it's just you're going to have to play the factions well. You're going to have to take the right quests. You're going to have to say no to some things that you might really want in the moment to perhaps getting things later on. Yeah, so there's not exactly any, fail with incorrect gear per se, because it's not about fighting, really. It's about surviving, which I think is a very awesome distinction that they're making. This is a shooter, but it's not always going to be about shooting. It feels like shooting almost is taking a secondary seat to the main gameplay, which is good. It's nice to see devs, again, trying something new. Skills and abilities. Definitely feel like these were going to be a thing, especially because there are multiple characters in this game. One of which, a community favorite that I've seen so far, is Gunhead, who seemingly has an interchangeable firearm as a head. The details of which and how that works we don't know about yet, but we can make some assumptions. Personally, I think it's going to act independently from the character and do a cover in all directions, which I would really like to see, especially if people are sneaking up behind us. That would be really fun to use. Could definitely see a lot of these characters being cool and unique, and it's not a hero shooter either, right? So these are some interesting ideas for an extraction shooter type genre. I would like to see some of the passive abilities that some of these characters have, and maybe some of the more in-depth abilities that let them interact with the world. On that note, I would like to see characters that have abilities that directly let them affect things out in, we'll call it a raid, when you go out and do something in the game world in a dangerous sort of way. I would like to see how that turns out. Maybe like a hacker type character that can open certain doors, or maybe a character that can bypass some sort of biosecurity because of their background, even if it's something as small as that. This next question, number 7, lends into, I think, some of the content we most previously touched on here. Again, it's not so much about the shooting, it's about navigating a war zone. So yes to IEDs, mines, and they're coming out with more. Chaff sounds really cool. If I'm reading into that right, that sounds really fun, like chaff countermeasures. Definitely cool. PC requirements, you can read that on your own. Not something I'm covering here. I'll leave it there for you guys for a second, but not something I can personally speak on. I'm not a big computer tech nerd. I just know how to use my computer really well, and I know it's good. So I'll leave that up to you guys. Solo play. Very interesting. Solo play, I feel like, could even be easier than group play at some points, especially if you're going to go do something very specific, maybe in a very specifically dangerous area. Because threat rating. If you have one guy, you have about 75% less threat rating than you would with 4 players. So I feel like there's definitely benefits. And it seems like Miles here says that 1 to 2 man squads is really fun. So that's what I'm looking forward to quite a bit as well. I have a feeling that 4-player play might be a bit too power fantasy for what they're going for, but we'll see, especially with how this threat rating system ends up working out. Finally, we've actually reached the question that I asked in the Discord. Will the players ever be able to have mechs or exosuits? They gave me a very kind of mysterious stay tuned, which is fine. But as they said, they've made a lot of mech games, or spent time on a lot of games with mechs. So hopefully we get some sort of mech here. My biggest inspiration for asking this question was actually their Exo Lifecycle trailer, which I found very interesting because A, it wasn't a fully closed mech, and you could very distinctly see the person inside. A lot of these mechs, obviously like combat focused and made, um, but in the hands of, I feel, a scav, they could turn these things into like huge utility tools. Or at the very least, if you had a character that could interact with, maybe abandoned mechs on the battlefield or bring their own into the battlefield, I don't think you would be very overpowered at all, even. In a lot of the media that's been released, we've seen narrow corridors, small doorways that mechs would not even be able to traverse. So there's a good chance that even if you brought a mech, there's quite a bit you would not be able to do with it. And in a larger sense, you would just be painting a target on your back. Threat level, again, all your friends could have pistols, but if they have a mech with them, that's a big deal. So we'll see how that ends up turning out. I hope at some point that if they do implement this, you'll be able to get in and out of your mech, um, possibly by sacrificing, maybe even having a rig with you. The mech, even as a character, feels like more of a support character than it would something you would ever take out on your own, because it wouldn't make much sense. The biggest cases, I think, for bringing a mech out into the battlefield would be doing very specific things, like, let's say, killing Toothy, if that's even possible. And for those of you who don't know, Toothy is a huge rogue AI mech robot that walks the battlefield, scooping people up and turning them into bioenergy, which is really cool. But that's one of the few case reasons I could see a mech would be probable, practical, and useful. Outside of that, I could see them being more of a problem. How large your maps can end up being. I feel like map size, even in Tarkov, is kind of unimportant because it's less about how big the map is and how big your obstacles from getting from point A to point B are. And spawns have been a note of contention for me when it comes to extraction shooters. I feel as though, especially in like a PvE shooter like this, maybe it would be better to allow players to pick their spawn if they're going after certain objectives. Random spawns never made a whole lot of sense to me, because if you're like, let's say in Tarkov, a professional sort of, person, you're going to probably infiltrate at the point that's closest to your objective, or maybe like the safest way to do it. But again, map size, I don't feel like that really matters, especially because like there's depth to these maps. Like we've seen like underground corridors that stretch down like stories. So I feel like size is it's very subjective. It's not something that can be easily measured. Modding support. Number 13. Should be interesting. They say that they'd love to explore it. The biggest thing with extraction shooters and mods that I have come to the conclusion of, especially with things like single-player Tarkov and modding projects like that, is that as soon as a mod is implemented into your game, you are then immediately cut off from the entire player base. Because if you add an item with a unique ID into your game, that's not something everyone else would be able to have. It's a unique item in a unique file that you have now imported into your game, and systems like bartering, donations, co-op interactions all have to be synchronized down to the mod that you would like to use. Now, this could be interesting in the long run when, let's say, the initial waves of support for this game have passed, and people are, we're down the line, a few years from now, and people want to play with their friends and add cool stuff that the community's made together. That's fine. That's cool, and that keeps games like this alive. Full conversion mod packs, weapon packs, armor packs, character packs, things that people make. Always awesome to see community come together and make fun stuff like that. But in the short term, not that important at all. Modding is cool, but it neither lends importance or urgency to what we have right now. So I wouldn't hold my breath on getting mod support anytime soon. it's unnecessary and doesn't need to be focused on now. At a later point, would love to see it. Number 14, prone in the game. Nope. As at least right now, they've looked at it, but it doesn't seem to be important. And I can kind of understand why, especially with like some of the models and stuff in the game. I feel like it would be particularly clunky in some parts. And with how much you're moving around in this game, I fail to see how important it would be. I mean, it'd be fun for stealth, right? Like laying down and having enemies walk right past you. Like, that's awesome. But I feel as though the enemies in this game are alert enough and the AI is not exactly designed for like hardcore stealth gameplay. And this, I will preface, it's just speculation. It very well could be, but I don't see prone being that particularly important, so I'm fine with it not being in the game, at least right now. HUD or minimal HUD? I feel like this is a good question because I like to take screenshots and do recording in video games, so I would like to turn everything off. I do like the idea that they played around with, that the HUD would be built out like an actual rig. Now, this brings me back to my posed question about exosuits and mechs earlier on in this line. I hope that if you ever get your hands on a mech, or like maybe some like type of equipment, or maybe a character that's all robot, aside from Gunhead, I'm going to give them some like benefit of the doubt at launch, but I would like to see separate HUDs for maybe some of the more specialized characters. I think that would go a long ways in selling the game in terms of like aesthetic, because that's cool. Helldivers was going to do it. The Helldivers devs talked about it. They talked about how some of the different specializations of helmets would have different HUDs, aka a medic HUD and engineer HUD, that we never got in the long run of the game, which would have been awesome. I would have loved to see that. Cool concept. Hopefully it gets implemented at some point. A gallery. Gallery is fantastic. So a gallery, especially in a game that's getting focused on by its aesthetics, I think would be awesome. Even if it's like a 3D model viewer, so you could zoom in and check out the insane detail some of these creatures and mechs and robots and just entities have in this game, would be awesome. I would love. This is one of the very few games I feel like I could just sit down and stare at like a pair of boots for like hours. It's awesome, and I really hope they have a gallery mode at some point. Maybe if you kill a certain amount of enemies, you know, it'll unlock them in the gallery and you'll be able to look at them. Maybe it'll even analyze their weaknesses and stuff so you don't have to refer to a wiki as often. That's something I really hope this game gets right. I don't like having to reference a wiki. I hate it. It takes me out of the game. It's not fun. It's something you have to do for Tarkov almost every quest, almost any time you have to go and do something particular in that game, you have to reference the wiki. You want to know where a key goes? Reference the wiki. Sure, you could spend time in game and spend hours and hours and hours looking for where that key goes or where this quest item is. Nobody wants to do that. It's not fun. It's bad game design. I hope they figure out a way to not have everyone referencing the wiki all the time. That's not fun. Anyways, enough ranting about that. Melee. Swords, machetes. It seems, again, so for stealth kills, sure. I would like to see maybe a sword. I feel like a sword, like, again, we're getting very close to like something like Space Marine 2 that's coming out in a few days. So I'll say chainsword as well. Especially for the smaller like cyborg type enemies that I've seen, the ones that like run at you and try to hit you. I would love to have a melee weapon to cut them down instead of using a firearm. I could see as why they wouldn't want melee weapons to exist, especially good ones, because it seems like ammo capacity and like the act of carrying enough ammo with you is important. So if they added melee weapons, maybe add a durability system. I feel like that would probably be the best way to do it. Or have them have energy packs. So like you'll have something like a chainsword, but you have to have the ammunition to use it. That could be interesting. Besides that though, pretty simple answer. Not right now. Can you pause the game when playing? No. Simple as. Fair enough. faction reputation system. This is a bigger one, and I'm glad they answered this, because they talk about map entry points, as we've discussed earlier on in this video, and vendor inventories, which is cool. So it seems like as these factions are fighting on maps, I'm guessing they're going to have points of control on the map that you'll probably be able to infiltrate or enter from, which is cool. And I'm guessing if you have bad reputation, you might lose entry into certain entryways or whatnot, which is also cool. I love the sort of like mercenary system they have going on here, playing all the sides and doing what you can to keep your friends alive and your innards going and survive in an awful world. Pretty cut and dry for games like this. I've seen a few other extraction shooters begin to like mess with like the faction idea, like Zero Sievert. They're a bit behind. You know, that's a tiny dev team and it's a 2D game. Very cool though in terms of the ideas they're going for as well. Really excited to see the faction system, how it turns out. Steam requirements, again, more graphic stuff. I'm not interested in covering that. Nothing I can say about that you can't find out on your own. Does carrying more loot slow you down? I feel like that's a pretty obvious question that it would. But it's cool that they mention how some of the characters are particularly better at, you know, let's say looting or navigating through the active war zone. So character classes are going to be a huge thing, and I'm really excited to see where those go. I would like to see proximity chat. Now, proximity chat in this game needs to be implemented in such a way where I'm not more inclined to use Discord. Proximity chat in games like this, I feel like need to almost be a gameplay element in of themselves to make them fun. And it sounds like when they talk about alien-style comms, is that they're trying to make it an immersive way of communicating with your friends, and if you wanted to have that more immersive experience, you could turn off Discord or mute yourself in Discord and then communicate in game. I would hope that it's well thought out, has good, you know, echoing, and maybe, you know, good like radio warbling, and maybe even things in-game that prevent long-range communication with your friends if you split up. Not that I think you would ever want to split the party in a game like this, but we'll see. But I like the idea, and I like that they're thinking about it. They're talking to GOG about releasing on GOG's platform, which is super great. GOG are awesome. They're owned by CD Projekt, creators of Cyberpunk 2077. They have great deals on there all the time, and would definitely recommend that you go and check them out if you're looking for some good deals on new and old video games alike. Their deals are crazy and get dirt cheap at times. Not sponsored, by the way. Would be really cool if I was. For number 24, it looks like the devs will be doing a mix of both polish and creation during post-launch, which is totally fine. It looks like they're going to be looking at us, the players, for a lot of their direction when it comes to further development of the game, which I think is both good and bad, because I think they need to filter out a lot of the players that are bent around having this game being, you know, being the most graphically impressive thing ever. You know, people are going to complain about the small things. I'm more of a macro-minded sort of person. I would like the core gameplay to be the most refined thing, and as well as new content being distinct and not just reskinned, let's say, guns or equipment. I like when things are added to the game that add a new dynamic. You know, the difference between adding an M4 and an AK, you know, both are functionally the same thing, but what if we added like a railgun AK made by the Euruskins? That'd be pretty awesome, and that would be different. You know, how it would have charge mechanics and different ammunition, different capacity, different threat ratings. I want to see stuff like that. I don't want to see more M4s, more AKs, more FN FALs. As much as I love those guns, they're really cool, but this design team has been doing some really special things with the design of a lot of their weapons. So I want to see more of that, but that's personal preference. So that's not my objective view on how I think they should be doing it. I think they're going to do it great, but I like new things, especially what these guys have made. Number 25, talking about hunter killers. This isn't something I actually have any context on. I think I've seen some floating type drones in some of the media, but not anything I feel like I could confidently comment on, especially because I wasn't in the closed beta as much as I wish I was. But hopefully they fix this, because apparently it was a bug. Great. Number 26, localizations. I hope to see the community come together and do a lot of localizations for this game. They said they need fan help, but it looks like they're going through on quite a few different languages, making this a widely accessible game to quite a few types of people out in the world, which is fantastic. Awesome. Thank you. And keep doing great work. In number 27, they talk deeply about threat rating, which I think is good, because threat rating seems to be, again, a core mechanic of this game. And they lean into talking about Army 2 and Payday. I think Payday is the most distinct example of a heat sort of system that I'm familiar with. I remember taking things in like the minigun, and you couldn't hide these things. They were just way too big and bulky for you to, stealth with. Some people were cracked and could do it. Not me. I like that's where they're like bringing inspiration from. So you can bring smaller things to do different objectives, or bring bigger things when you're going after something big. So the loadout and group diversity seems really cool, and I can't wait to have those conversations with my friends about like, hey, who's bringing what, who's bringing like the big rig, who's bringing, support weapons, blah blah blah. Oh no, you guys can't bring, all three of those guns, we're gonna get heat on us so quick, blah blah blah. Those are the conversations that I feel like are just going to be part of the gameplay and fun, and just that, composing your loadout, and someone maybe brings something a bit too big, you get dunked on. That's life. Really cool though. I like the concept behind this. Now, this is the biggest point of contention and the last question they answered, and has the biggest response from the devs, and also the biggest question. And it's the water mechanic. It's a composed list of quite a few different questions that I think all kind of boil down to people being worried about not being able to play and losing all their progress because of the initial water that they have for their innards. My personal take on this, I've discussed this with a few of my friends, is that the water system actually might be a good thing. Let me explain. So in a lot of games, let's use Tarkov as an example, best way we can use it as an example is through their PvE mode that was most recently released. The reason why I'm using the PvE mode as an example is because it is a decidedly no-wipe system. Now, the biggest problems that come from a no-wipe system is that when they eventually implement new content, and let's say I have all the best armor in the game, a whole huge stockpile of best armor in the game, and let's say most of the best guns in the game, the rotary grenade launcher from the Goons, and let's say 10 of those or whatnot, and these things are possible. Players have gotten that much stuff. Let's say the update is oriented around the mid game, and they're adding mid game weapons like they most recently did, like the Uzi. I have no inclination as a player to want to use those weapons because they no longer are applicable to the power creep of the game. Now, I think if you lose the innards, you by extension lose your loot and vendors, that gives an opportunity for you to work back up through the systems and interact with perhaps systems that have been updated or new content has been added to, and reassociate with the game in such a way that you are now doing different things and interacting with content that the devs have now released. I think people are a bit too worried about the water system. I think in the long run it's going to give way to systems that allow for much longer and healthier replayability for this game. I think if I could ask all of you for one thing, is just give it a chance. Yes, you might lose your things, but also I feel like that's kind of the point. This world sucks and nothing's permanent. Enjoy it while you can. And there are also, as we saw with the first questions, I don't believe they're wiping character skills or XP. So I think there's going to be some carryover. They said they're also looking into ensuring certain weapons and stuff at some point, so you have some carryover if your innards do die, which is fine. But there's also the daily donation boxes that you can get free gear from. How much you can get from these, who knows? But it feels like they've thought about this, and too many people are jumping to conclusions that don't need to be jumped to so quickly. I understand the concern from the community, but also let's express our criticism after we've seen it. I think the only bad part about the water mechanic that could ever be the bad part about the water mechanic is if we give criticism to their mechanic after launch and then they misstep or don't listen to us or do things of that nature. Then we can begin to get upset. I think so many people are filled with current vitriol towards something we haven't even seen. People need to chill a bit. Besides that, though, that was the recap of all the questions that were posed in the most recent Q&A. And again, I think overall, this is exceptional. They are interacting with the community often. I'm sure we're going to see a drop-off with this once the game actually releases. But until then, I think they've done a fantastic job of both interacting with us, listening to us, and responding. Besides that, though, thank you for listening. Hopefully some of these takes gave perhaps some illumination on the game as a whole. And until the next content drop that comes from the Forever Winter, be it on the 24th or another Q&A session that they host. But yeah, thank you for watching, and I hope you enjoyed the content. Have a great day.